We are live. I love when it yells at you. It's like, you are live. It's very encouraging. It's very sort of affirming. It's a great way to start a podcast. Thank you, StreamYard. He is Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. We are live. This is Mind Your Banners for July 18th, 2025. The final July, if you observe the strictest calendar possible in the college football world of the offseason, because for Big Ten teams next week is Media Day, which I think in a lot of people's eyes also serves as kind of the de facto kickoff of the athletics season, not just the football season in the Big Ten. Mike, you will be there in Las Vegas. And we're going to talk a lot today about just basically where Indiana is heading into Media Days. I think it's fair to say it's pretty uncommon for Indiana to kind of carry some of the juice and some of the momentum that it is going to take out to Vegas. But first and foremost, my friend, how are you?
I'm good.
You're just good?
Did you have a collared shirt under there, or is that just the design?
No, this was like big collars were all the thing on 90s soccer kits. Big collars and like ridiculous patterns on goalkeeper shirts. The goalkeepers used to have these like just absurd patterns, and they would get shirts that were like 3 sizes too big, so that when they would run out to try and like stop a striker, they would just look ridiculous. They would look like giant like ogres, basically.
Well, because the way with the frame in the video, it looks like just like a tiny collar, like you just didn't get it big enough.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it looks a little bit like a priest collar, and that's not intended. But no, this was maybe 93 to 95, somewhere in there, before my time as a Liverpool fan. But one of my favorite kits, John Barnes, number 10 on the back. Anyway. People don't need to know that. Let's dive in here, Mike. Somebody asked me recently, and I guess I want to start this a little bit philosophically, but somebody asked me recently about, last year Curt Cignetti made some waves with things that he said at Big Ten Media Day. I think the biggest one was, the whole we finished 17th and then we finished second or first or whatever. And he said, like, that's not a prediction, it's just a fact. And they were sort of saying, like, what do you think he might say this year? What do you think he might kind of turn some heads with? And I said, truthfully, we haven't had as many of those kind of Cignetti moments. We haven't had a Google me. We haven't had like a Purdue sucks. I wouldn't say we've had anything quotable at that level in, if you want to say like the breadth of quote unquote year 2 of Curt Cignetti, everything basically since the season ended. And part of me figures he's probably just a little bit more comfortable in his skin. But part of me also just wonders if he feels like some of that's not necessary, because he talked so much, through last season about how he felt like that bullishness was something he needed to imbue into his program, that he sensed a real sort of lack of ambition and lack of belief. And he needed to, kind of inject some of that into IU football. It just doesn't. I wonder if he just feels like that's not necessary this time around.
Actually, I summed up for a preview that's coming on Sunday. Here's a couple other things. He talked about getting rid of the deadwood in the portal, dissed the Rose Bowl as just an old stadium, took some shots at Coastal Carolina. I don't know if you remember those.
Yes, that was pretty random.
Amy Shadwell taking some strays there. And then obviously railed against self-imposed limitations, which is one of his favorite topics. I do think there is something to be said for him using, when he gets a national or platform like College Game Day, the Pat McAfee Show, some of the national podcasts he's done, to try to stand out a little bit. He doesn't want IU, I think, being sort of forgotten in the mix. I do think there is, I don't think he's going to be, nothing crazy, but I do think he wants to sort of say we're here and make sure that they know, IU wasn't a fluke. So I don't know, maybe there'll be that many notable things, but I do think he likes to use these. He's very deliberate. Like, I don't think, he's being honest when he says these things, but when he's using these appearances, I don't think it's a mistake that, he's trying to get attention.
No, I just wonder if he almost just feels like it's not as necessary as it was a year ago, because Indiana has externally, Indiana has that attention. I mean, like quite literally, Indiana's non-conference scheduling became a national point of interest this week. You and I both wrote about it. You got some really good insight from Scott Dolson, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But externally, while I'm not suggesting Indiana is the most like relevant brand in college football, and I'm not even sure I would go as far as when Curt Cignetti said that they were the emerging superpower in college football. Externally, people are talking about Indiana. Like Indiana's not fighting for that oxygen the way it was a year ago.
But I think you want to frame the debate separate from the schedule, and I think maybe that's where he'll go with it. I mean,
and that's fair. What I mean is, but also internally, I think maybe he looks around and feels like I don't need to be this guy that's just constantly sort of stoking the fire. Like the fire is burning fine on its own. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, maybe, but like we'll see. I mean, this is
maybe not. It's hard to say.
I don't know. I tend to believe that he'll be. I don't know, when a mic gets in front of him and he gets a little loose. I mean,
I'm sure he'll drop some zingers. There's no doubt. Yeah. But like, to your point about reviewing kind of all of the,
like the list might not be as long, and
it already isn't. Like Google Me was what like 2 weeks after he was hired. I mean, and
nobody's asked about Jamie Chadwell since. Maybe this is an opportunity.
That's true. If you can bring up Liberty football, you might get one or two. You can intersect that with non-conference schedule.
There you go. Have you thought about bringing back your rival from your
old friend Jamie Chadwell, diehard rival? Let's talk about the schedule.
Here, Duncan. The players have been announced. It's Aiden Fisher, Mikel Kamara, and Elijah Surratt. Obviously, a pretty deserving trio in terms of the success they had. Obviously, guys that all came with him from JMU. Aiden Fisher, he'll now be a 2-time attendee of the event. I think having named Mendoza, there's a world in which you bring the quarterback, but obviously he hasn't played for Indiana. But
do you see Colorado brought both of its quarterbacks to Big 12 media day? I mean, listen, it might work out fine, but like that. At least that's what I thought I saw. Like that was how I processed what I was seeing.
Big brothers would have been the move.
That's true. I mean, it'd be like a buddy cop movie at that point.
There you go. But a very and good. Kamara's always good with the mic in front of him. And it'll be an interesting group to talk to next week.
Let's talk about the schedule. Briefly. So for the uninitiated, and I don't know how many of you listening are at this point uninitiated, because I don't know how you could have missed this given how little else is going on. Indiana, as you reported, dropped Virginia off of its future schedules, bought out of that 2-game series. This follows buying out of the last 2 games of the Louisville series and I think the return trip of the UConn series. And correct me if I'm wrong, means that up to the Notre Dame series beginning in 2030, is that right? Indiana does not have a Power 5 non-conference opponent on its schedule. This has, as you can imagine, drawn some criticism, particularly from other, sort of outside the Big Ten, particularly from our good friends down south. It's reflective of a pretty marked sea change, because there was a time when the Big Ten was a lot stricter about things like when you couldn't schedule FCS opponents. The reason most of these games were on the schedule to begin with was the Big Ten had initiated a non-conference Power 5 like annual requirement for scheduling. This has very much, or does very much reflect the ongoing debate about 9 conference games versus 8 conference games and the SEC Big Ten dynamic, which is just going to be never ending in the sort of, near to medium term future in college football. But from your perspective, first, as somebody who talked Scott Dolson, can you kind of walk people through, as you perceived it, his kind of rationale for this being the strategy, which we should say up front predates Curt Cignetti, predates IU as anything resembling a playoff contender, but just sort of, not both his rationale and maybe to a certain extent, as much as you're comfortable putting words in somebody else's mouth, kind of his mindset going forward on this, essentially.
Well, I think essentially they were more aggressive than basically every other team in the Big Ten in terms of changing the schedule, and not just sort of leaving the dates they had, signed up for during, like you said, when there were rules that required this thing. Like the college football landscape has changed, and so they needed to, they felt like they weren't just going to leave those games and play them on the schedule, even though it cost them some money. So they moved to sort of adapt to the model that was adopted for the college football, and now that model is sort of up for debate. And they are sort of monitoring that, and I think the schedule will kind of change based on what is ultimately decided in terms of the model. The 4-4-4, what is it, 3-4s or 4-4s or 2-4s, 2-4s, 2-2,
4-4-2-2-1-1 or 4-4-2-2-1-3 or 5+11. So
yes, with the automatic qualifiers versus sort of the at-large, and that will sort of dictate what the schedule is. And I think I put together kind of the list of how many teams are playing in Big Ten, have Power 4 teams on their schedule kind of through 2029. And, look, Indiana stands out. This year, they're one of 5 teams that's not playing a Power 4 team. So, I mean, not unique. Are unique in the sort of the long-term future that they have very, very little. But, I mean, there are teams now. Hold on. My son has started vacuuming for some reason. Never does this. Never does this.
This is wonderful radio. This is outstanding radio.
Unbelievable. So, I can't remember now where I was, but in terms of the larger Big Ten, I think that more teams could adopt that trend. Like USC has, I think, the most openings, 7 openings, and could, theoretically have 3 years where they don't face one. It'll just depend kind of on how these teams, like, I think IU might be leading a trend here based on where the playoff discussion ultimately ends up. I think they're out in front of everybody, but I don't think that they'll ultimately be unique. And especially because, and you talked about reasoning, the 9-game schedule and it not being balanced sort of with some of the other conference, I think is impacting a lot of these decisions as well.
Yeah, basically, like, I mean, what I wrote off of what you wrote, which feels very Blazing Saddles. Gabby Johnson's right about Howard Johnson's being right. Was that when we get into debates like this, so much of it turns into treating a symptom like the problem. The problem isn't, this school scheduling this way or that conference having this rule or whatever. The problem is that we want to, and this is a bit of an exaggeration, but we kind of want to NFLify college football. We want something that looks more like the professional postseason model that, like, we literally call it a playoff, and we're about to expand it to 16 teams. But we're doing that despite the fact that, unlike in the NFL, where all the constituents are under one umbrella and all of the questions from the size of the playoff to the way that it's seeded to the regular season path to get there, who you play in the regular season and why, and divisions and the seeding matchups from the previous year where ones play ones and twos play twos and on and on. All of that can be universally agreed upon because everybody is in the room together and everybody is generally part of the same constituency. And that, I think, crucially includes the television partners. We're trying to do all this with a whole bunch of people that ultimately are motivated by self-interest. And as long as we have imbalances like, 2 of the Power 4 conferences playing 8 games in the regular season, 2 of the Power 4 conferences playing 9 games in the regular season, as long as we can't agree on a playoff format, like, we're going to keep treating these debates that pop up as the issue that needs to be solved, when really they are all just reflective of the wider issue, which is we want to create a uniform path through the college football season to a national championship game. But we don't want to agree upon that uniformity as it pertains to things like regular season scheduling. And so when it's left up to the schools, they've just got to figure out what to do, what's best for themselves. As you said, Indiana has been more bullish in its strategy than some other schools, but it's equally fair to point out this strategy predates a time when we were really talking about Indiana as anything resembling a playoff contender. Indiana was just trying to get to a place where it could consistently think about postseason eligibility, bowl eligibility, and building a stronger, more consistent winning culture. If you want this stuff to go away, then everybody's got to come to the table and kind of deal honestly and fairly. And, for a whole host of reasons, that's exceptionally difficult. But until we can at least settle some very basic questions, like, for example, what playoff format do we want? And for the uninformed, because I know not everybody follows this as religiously as sports writers, the Big Ten strongly supports a model where the Big Ten and the SEC each in a 14 or a 16-team playoff, the Big Ten and the SEC each get 4 automatic berths. The ACC and Big 12 get 2 apiece. There's still a G5 automatic berth, and then there are 3 at-large berths. Everyone below the Big Ten and the SEC supports a 5+11 model, which is 5 automatic berths and 11 at-large. For I think we could tell all the obvious reasons. The SEC has been pretty tepid in its support of the 4+4 model. But the point is, until we can get to a place where we can agree on stuff as basic as that, or even just frankly the size of the playoff, which was such a topic of debate this time a year ago, the idea that individual schools sort of scheduling philosophies is the problem that is, you're kind of putting to somehow force, like, for example, Indiana to schedule tougher as a solution to this feels like putting a Band-Aid on a knife wound. The problem is much greater.
And we talked about this sort of like off air. Just it's all in response to sort of a unicorn schedule. Look, the non-conference schedule was terrible last year, but it wouldn't have looked as bad as if like every Big Ten basically hit their floor instead of their ceiling on their schedule, with like the exception of Ohio State. You know what I'm saying? So like to sort of respond and say, we need to go in this extreme direction, or we need to change our future schedules to that. I don't think you sort of look at their reaction has kind of been the opposite, and that's what Curt Cignetti kind of talked about multiple occasions in terms of like, look, our schedule on paper before the season did not look terrible. Like we played the schedule we had, and it got worse, as obviously they've acknowledged. Like it was an easier schedule, but that wasn't really sort of what it looked like at the start. And I mean, this year, I think just by nature of the home road splits are a little different, is that, I think no matter what, it will be a little tougher, even if some of the teams don't hit kind of what their expectations are. But I mean, now you're back to sort of normal. And I think if you, like you said, like, if you go into a Penn State and win 2 out of the 3 out of, Iowa, Penn State, and Oregon, nobody's going to be talking about this argument. I just think last year, because it came down to the margins, and if you had kept a Louisville and Louisville was decent, like that helps you. That might push you kind of and not have these discussions. But it was mainly because I think the overall what's driving sort of Indiana as sort of the model is because that schedule was so bad. But that was a unique year, and that happens from time to time. Teams do get lucky with the scheduling makers.
Right. I mean, like our good friend Adam Rittenberg at ESPN just pointed out, like we're probably talking about an outlier. When we discuss Indiana specifically in 2024, we are probably talking about an outlier. And you and I have both said many times in different conversations about the 2025 season that on paper, Indiana's schedule looks tougher, and it's possible they could win fewer games and still make the playoff, because it's unlikely that you would see the bottom fall out of the Big Ten schedule so dramatically as it did for IU. And listen, Indiana took full advantage of that. I think they deserved, I've said many times, they deserve to be in the playoff. That's not the issue. It's more just that if we're talking strictly about scheduling, the strength of schedule, it's hard to imagine that happening in the average year. Now, I do think there, again, are some attendant issues with conference scheduling at a time when conferences have gotten so big, because you just get such imbalance. I mean, last year, was it Oregon that played all of, or was it Ohio State that played all of Oregon, Penn State, and Indiana? None of the other 3 in the top 4 played anybody in the top 4 except Ohio State. And when you stretch these conferences out further and further and further, we can't play 18-game conference, or college football regular seasons. That's not practical. When you stretch these conferences out further and further, you are going to get more imbalanced schedules, and you're going to get years where somebody, only plays one of the top five, or somebody has to play four of the top five, or whatever. But that is an issue that is going to affect college football writ large going forward. That's not reflective of like the question of how scheduling philosophy intersects with like playoff worthiness and competitiveness and things like that. Because I mean, it's, listen, if you're the SEC, for example, and I think this has been one of the arguments that the SEC's made historically, is that unlike the Big Ten, even the modern Big Ten, even the post-expansion Big Ten, the SEC has a lot of historical rivalries that are outside its own conference. South Carolina has to play Clemson every year. Georgia has to play Georgia Tech every year. Florida State, Kentucky, Louisville. Certainly in the old Big Ten, that just was not the case. And even in the new Big Ten, I mean, Indiana did bring USC and UCLA's primary rival into the conference together, other than if you want to see, USC Notre Dame, and that's always something a little bit different. But, if you look at Georgia's schedule for this season, I was doing this in a discussion earlier today. Georgia's playing Charlotte, Austin Peay, third game that I can't remember that's, like a Kennesaw State level game, and then Georgia Tech. That's their non-conference schedule. But Georgia would say, if you give us a ninth conference game, we still have to go play Georgia Tech, or we have to disrupt, a century-old rivalry. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not presenting this as purely the Big Ten is right, Indiana is right, the SEC is wrong. Like, there are merits to, and I think weaknesses in everybody's arguments in this case. It's just that as long as everybody is only kind of worried about their own self-interest and their own sort of wants and needs, we're not going to get the kind of uniformity that is going to put this sort of thing, if not to bed, then at least, really kind of smooth it out across the board.
Well, I don't think the Big Ten is going to take like I think they've sort of ignored the SEC talking points essentially because, look, those long-standing rivalries aside, the Big Ten is not going to care about those because those have gone the way by Michigan State, Notre Dame. That sort of faded. They've had to kind of not make it annual and everything. So I mean, those things happen when you have to go this direction, and I don't think they're sympathetic to that. Because they're not playing the 9 games, they're going to say, look, it's just a matter of we have as many Power 4 games on the schedule as most of your teams do. I mean, just because they're adding the 9th to sort of match that. And so I don't think they're going to take – I don't think they've sort of listened to this criticism and taken it to heart. Just like – because I think if all the Power 5 conferences went to the 9 games, then I think you have room for sort of discussion on that level. But neither the SEC or the ACC seems sort of like about to, in imminent hurry to sort of make that change.
I know you got a hard out around in about 15, 20 minutes. I guess that doesn't make it a hard out. If it's somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. But I do want to talk a little bit about, kind of where Indiana is at heading into media days and just the broader idea of the preseason. And one of the things I wanted to touch on was something, teaser alert, that you and I put together a roundtable for that I think will be live at IndyStar.com and HeraldTimesOnline.com Monday. Just talking about Fernando Mendoza. And, you mentioned there was probably even some potential justification for bringing him to media day. I understand why Indiana's not, but, certainly I don't think anyone would have batted an eye if Indiana had elected to bring him. He's the clear number 1 quarterback right now. He's got, in some respects, I wouldn't say in all respects, but in some respects, an even more impressive resume than the player he's replacing did this time a year ago in Curtis Rourke. That does not mean
he has a more impressive resume.
He threw for 3,000 yards in a power conference last year. I mean, the whole question about Rourke.
So wait. You're saying throwing? Whoa. This is Curtis Rourke erasure. This is
Curtis Rourke erasure.
Wait. You would say what was Cal's record? Wait a minute. Wait. That's ridiculous.
Ollie, turn the vacuum cleaner back on.
Wait, Cal was 6-7 last year, and he was quarterback for about half the season in 2023 when they also went 6-7. And Curtis Rourke led Ohio. I mean, I know it's not the Power Four, but to back-to-back 10-win seasons, bowl games. Like, and you're saying that that's less impressive than going 6-7, throwing 300,000 yards at Cal.
What I said was, and I believe I have audio,
more impressive resume.
Record of this.
You said more impressive resume.
In some respects, not all, but some.
Okay, what are the some?
A more impressive resume. Like, for example, the fact that we don't have to ask what Fernando Mendoza looks like as a quarterback at the Power 4 level. We know he threw for 3,000 yards last year behind an offensive line that let him get sacked 41 times.
But a team that didn't win.
A team that did win. Do you know how hard it is to win at Cal now, especially now that they're in the ACC? Like, they have to fly 3,000 miles for every road game.
And Curtis Rourke was a 3,000-yard passer that did it almost.
I understand that. And the most fundamental question we had about Curtis Rourke this time a year ago was, does that translate when he goes from the G5 level to the Power 4 level?
I just don't think it's fair to say. I don't think it's fair to say Fernando Mendoza's resume was like
in some respects,
that won 20 games in 2 years.
Turning this into a zero-sum argument. In some respects,
is doing heavy lifting.
I put it to the audience here. I suspect more people will tell me that your argument requires.
And to Mark's point, he did it on one leg last year.
Yeah, okay, but no. I did not say his Curtis Rourke's resume postseason 2024.
But I know, but I'm just saying it makes it all the more impressive that he only had the one working.
No doubt. And we can compare Fernando Mendoza in December to Curtis 2025 to Curtis Rourke in December 2024. Right now, I'm comparing Fernando Mendoza July 2025 to Curtis Rourke July 2024. That is what I'm doing.
I'm just saying, look, yes, he did. He was at a poor Power 4 team. I just don't think his resume at that Power 4 team was more impressive than what Curtis Rourke did at Ohio. Because it's not easy to win at Ohio either, regardless of, like, yes, you're not playing a Power 4 schedule, but that's not a place that has historically won games at that rate. So I mean, like, the resume question, that's I don't know, man.
You know,
there you go. There's your clip for social media. There you go.
This clip is going up on the locker room wall. And it's kind of simply, I don't know how they're going to do that. San Francisco
to motivate Curtis Rourke, and he can be like, look, Zach Osterman said my
Curtis Rourke is going to be like Brock Purdy part 2. Like, that's going to happen. In all seriousness, we talked about Mendoza, and the strengths are obvious. I think anyone who saw him, looked at a film at Cal, saw him in bits and pieces at IU. I know you were at the in the spring. I know you were at the spring game. The arm is there. The arm talent, as coaches like to say, is there. I do think there are some questions. I mean, number one of the big ones for me is anytime a quarterback takes 41 sacks in 12 games, no matter how bad your offensive line is, that probably has something to do with the quarterback too. Number two, even if you're going to give the quarterback more benefit of the doubt in a case like that, and Curt Cignetti has quite literally said this to me since the end of spring season, the challenge then is if you put him in front of a better offensive line, and I strongly suspect Indiana will, is getting that quarterback to trust that offensive line. Because a lot of times once quarterbacks have kind of developed happy feet, they have, it's hard to get rid of those, just in a few months. I think there are some strengths. I know you brought up in that roundtable that we have forthcoming, Mendoza's mobility, not just maybe as a pure runner, but also his ability to move the pocket a little bit. As you pointed out, we now know Curtis Rourke, just wasn't going to be able to do that as consistently because of the knee injury. But I think there are still, some genuine questions for Mendoza. And honestly, if we want to talk about the value of the non-conference schedule for Indiana, anytime you're bringing in any quarterback who's a transfer, I think the idea that you can give them 3 games of on-ramp is really useful. I think we saw that for Curtis Rourke last year. He was a completely different quarterback by the time he played UCLA than he was, FIU, from a comfort perspective and a rhythm perspective. And I think doing the same for Mendoza is going to be very valuable for Indiana.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think one thing you didn't bring up, which I think is sort of will be interesting to see how it kind of plays out in terms of like Kurtzberg hit the ground running, but like and he had so much experience in terms of games played, games started, situations like in his record in one run or one possession games, one possession games was really strong coming here. He had experienced a lot more. I feel like, over a longer period of time as a fifth year senior that I think helped him, you know, not having many growing pains last year. And it'll be interesting to see, like you said, they do get the 3 sort of preseason games, quality games, that they'll have some room for error. But how quickly, once they hit the Big Ten schedule, like you saw in that first game against UCLA, Curtis Hork was sort of ready for the moment. And it'll be interesting to see that Illinois game if Mendoza has a similar sort of performance. That doesn't take him time to sort of adjust.
I still think you are doing down Mendoza here. Like, we're talking about a guy who has 629 career pass attempts at the Power 5 level. He started something like 18 or 19 games. Like, I mean, that, like, if you told me that any team at all, and it doesn't matter if they're a transfer, if they're a holdover quarterback, whatever, that a team's starting quarterback had 19 games of starting experience at the Power 4 level with more than 600 pass attempts across 2 seasons as a redshirt junior, I would not be questioning that player's experience at all. Never mind the fact
I'm saying there's a difference. Okay, but I mean, I think there's a difference.
100 yards and 30 touchdowns and led 2 bowl-eligible seasons. I would not be questioning that player's experience at all.
Well, I mean, 40 games of experience versus 20 games of experience. There's more experience.
More experience. That doesn't, but that does not, like, I don't think that makes Mendoza inexperienced. That would make Alberto Mendoza inexperienced. Certainly, I don't think that makes Fernando Mendoza.
I'm not saying inexperienced. I'm saying a different level. Sometimes, like your point, I said it's a different level of experience.
So in the middle here, where we live in a world of gray and nuance, and
I think it's a different level of experience. I think he has more room to grow, and especially since, like you said, he did not have the greatest of seasons last year in terms of like their success level. So you go. What was it last year? He went in one possession games. He was 1-3, 1-4.
Okay, I don't know that. I will look it up. Let's see. One is 8 points in one possession game.
It's in a one possession.
All right, that's fair. So he's 1-2. I have to pull up the whole schedule. Let's see. He's 2-2, 2-3, 2-4, 2-5, 2-6.
I mean, that's not great. Like, I mean, and so like I think there's like, and as you get more experience in those moments, you get better. And so I think that's my point.
I mean, he threw for 300 yards in one of those games.
Right, but I mean, but if you can't, if you asked a question about Fernando Mendoza this year throwing 300 yards in a one possession game that IU lost, Curt Cignetti will not appreciate that question. He'll be like,
"That's fine."
He did not play well enough to win, or he didn't make the winning plays in the winning moments. If he threw for 300, volume doesn't matter, and pass attempts.
Okay, but I will throw this back at you then. He added more than 5.5 points to his completion percentage from 2023 to 2024. He threw almost a full yard more on his per attempt average, and he cut his interceptions or his pass attempts per interception from 24.3 all the way to 64.3. Like, the idea
what are the numbers if you're not making the winning plays in crunch time? What do I completed 35 passes matter? Or what I didn't throw an interception, but I didn't make 3 right throws on the final drive. I think there's a difference, and I think there's a learning curve when you've started, say, for 3+ seasons versus 1+ season, because we're just talking basically about a season and a half or a little less than that. And so I do think there is a difference, and I do think there's a difference still between what the level of defenses he'll face. Also, it's not as stark of a defense.
The level of defense he'll have with him. In one of those losses, Cal gave up 33 points, and another one they gave up 39. I mean, like it hand him a better defense, and that conversation changes as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can make all those changes, but their record was what it was. Like
Sure.
they were not great in one possession games, and that goes back to the previous year too.
There
So
are
like,
areas of gray. There are
there are
real
areas of growth for somebody with 20 games of experience versus 35 or 40, and that was my point. I'm not saying like he's like going to be out there like I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just saying like,
you have
look,
no faith in Fernando Mendoza.
no, I do, but I do think that it's just it having a
Right
guy.
here now, Mike Niziolek is 0-12.
Having,
He's
having a,
0-12 and
I don't think that I'm saying something crazy here. You're saying 300-yard games are more important. I'm saying wins are more important. Like and look, I mean, you're saying
I'm
Ohio
saying improvement is worth.
You're making Ohio seem like Ohio State, like Curtis Rourke was playing for Ohio State. I still think it's impressive when you are consistently winning games at the quarterback position versus consistently throwing 300-yard games at the quarterback position because stats are inflated now more than ever. And so like to throw 3,000 yards is not the same accomplishment as it was 5-10 years ago. Like, I mean, and because you're playing more games.
Line that allowed 41 sacks.
What?
Like, I think it is in front of an offensive line that allowed 41 sacks. Like the fact that you can get to 3,000 yards when you have that little protection is still pretty meaningful, I think.
But it also means you're throwing the ball a lot too, because I mean they're a team that did throw the ball a lot. So I mean it's just in terms of like if you just look at like that and it's volume based, like it's only 230 yards a game. It's not like something like astounding number because he just hit above 3,000. It's not talking about 3,900. He averaged, when you say it like that, averaging 230 yards a game is not like going to blow the doors off of it. Like so, but it's not. I'm not even questioning him like his ability. Like I think he is obviously a better draft prospect right now in terms of like draft profile than Curtis Rourke had. I think his mechanics have been talked about and all of that. He has the natural tool set to be a top prospect in the draft. My point is just that I think there's a difference. He has not shown sort of last year that he pulled that team to 8 wins even. And there were a lot of one possession games, a lot of moments, a lot of opportunities there for a quarterback. That's all.
I mean, it's unbelievable the just the pro Curtis Rourke bias here. You wrote that
2-10 win season.
You wrote that big Curtis Rourke feature, and now you're just in the bag for Curtis Rourke. You're going to start a blog.
I think Curt Cignetti would agree that if you throw for 300 yards and you lose, that's not a great game. That does not automatically qualify you for like you've done a great job.
I want to wrap this up with just to kind of set the stage for Media Day, and I know you got to go in a minute, but a year ago, Indiana goes to Indianapolis, and they're picked 17th in one preseason poll that I think the media put together, and there is that Curt Cignetti's up there. Almost, it feels like at times almost kind of trying to introduce like his roster and sort of tell his story, and of course he does it very colorfully. I remember the 2021 Big Ten Media Day session when there were a lot of people that were kind of looking at Indiana and thinking, like I mean externally, where is the right place to set the bar for this team, after the previous 2 seasons under Tom Allen? I don't think anybody thought they were going to go 2-10. A lot of people thought, another 8-win season would be really good, just kind of that consistent building the floor, firming up the foundation underneath you. I'm curious for your thoughts about just what the mood's going to be around Indiana, going into these media days, because I don't think they're a conference favorite by any means. I still think a lot of people are going to see them as, let's say, maybe a top 6, top 7 team in the conference. I think there are a lot of people that will probably even look at them and say, a return to the playoff is probably, more likely not going to happen than going to happen, but it's not out of the realms of possibility. Like I don't think it would be hard to paint the average sort of, Big Ten beat writer or national analyst a picture of Indiana as a playoff contender again in 2025. I'm just curious, like, what you think the mood is around this program going into media days next week.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of optimism and momentum from the spring. I thought they were happy sort of how they got through it relatively healthy. They the transfers fit in. I think the chemistry is good, and so it'd be interesting to see if the kids sort of the players sort of address some of the because I think that a lot of the topics will be, especially when you're getting kind of in a room with a lot of national media about the schedule and about some of those things and what their kind of response will be. This is not a very defensive kind of group. They're very players that will give an honest answer, and so I'm curious to see what direction it goes. If they're sort of very bullish and sort of express that, if they sort of ignore some of the questions about the scheduling, like how do they approach that, and what's kind of their sort of I like you said, I think it's the team's in a good headspace, but how that kind of plays out in Vegas will be interesting to see.
Do you think it is valuable in a way that it's 3 JMU guys? And I think that narrative thread is probably going to fade a little bit this year, understandably, because you have the proof of concept of Curt Cignetti's Indiana. We're not just constantly sort of reaching back for Curt Cignetti's James Madison in so many different ways, but that like the guys who have been sort of explaining the vision and the process and the ambition the whole way through here are the ones that are going to go represent the program at a time when it probably is, from a perception perspective, when you talk about the schedule, when you talk about expectations, important to be, kind of firm in your convictions again, essentially, that it's guys that have been kind of in that, this is a bad analogy, but kind of in that foxhole pretty much the whole time. Do you think that's more valuable?
Well, yeah, and they know Curt Cignetti, as well as anybody. They know that this, much of the key members of the staff, because obviously they carried over from JMU, witnessing that transformation and sort of, Curt Cignetti talks a lot about sort of long-term plans and kind of that emerging superpower, but building that culture in the locker room. And these are the guys that have done it now at 2 places for him or helped him. And so I do think there's value in that, and rewarding that. And you've seen guys, Elijah Surratt started out at St. Francis. None of these guys were very heavily recruited. These are all success stories for Curt Cignetti. I mean, for JMU as well, but Indiana. And so, you want to sort of reward those players and give them a platform to sort of talk about how it all happened. Because, I mean, they can trace it from its beginning.
We'll leave it there. He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. Next time, we're just going to let Ollie do the podcast because he has much more reasonable opinions. But thank you so much for listening. I don't know if we'll do one of these next week, or maybe when do you get back from Vegas? Because Mike's going. We split up Vegas and Puerto Rico, and Mike got Vegas. So when are you back?
Saturday morning. I'm taking a red eye.
We'll probably pull back like week after to really recap kind of everything that spooled out of Media Day, because my suspicion is, with the season starting earlier than normal this year, Indiana's probably going to go a little bit more quickly from Media Days into preseason camp than it normally would. So there's going to be a noticeable acceleration in the speed of the offseason here in the coming week. He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. This has been Mind Your Manners for July 18th, 2025, for the Herald Times, for the Indianapolis Star. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you soon.